Chapter 11 of The American Housewife. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Nick Number. The American Housewife by Anonymous. Chapter 11. 168. Rules to be observed in making nice cake. Cake, to be good, must be made of nice materials. The butter, eggs, and flour should not be stale, and the sugar should be of a light color and dry. Brown sugar answers very well for most kinds of cake, if rolled free from lumps and stirred to a cream with the butter. The flour should be sifted and, if damp, dried perfectly, otherwise it will make the cake heavy. The eggs should be beaten to a froth, and the cake will be more delicate if the yelks and whites are beaten separately. Saleratus and soda should be perfectly dissolved and strained before they are stirred into the cake. Raisins for cake should have the seeds taken out. Zante currants should be rinsed in several waters to cleanse them, rubbed in a dry cloth to get out the sticks, and then spread on platters and dried perfectly before they are put into the cake. Almonds should be blanched, which is done by turning boiling water on them and letting them remain in it till the skins will rub off easily. When blanched, dry them, then pound them fine, with rose water to prevent their oiling. When the weather is cold, the materials for cake should be moderately warmed before mixing them together. All kinds of cake that are made without yeast are better for being stirred, till just before they are baked. The butter and sugar should be stirred together till white, then the eggs, flour, and spice added. Saleratus and cream should not be put in till just before the cake is baked. Add the fruit last. Butter the cake pans well. The cake will be less liable to burn if the pans are lined with white buttered paper. The cake should not be moved while baking if it can be avoided, as moving it is apt to make it heavy. The quicker most kinds of cakes are baked, the lighter and better they will be, but the oven should not be of such a furious heat as to burn them. It is impossible to give any exact rules as to the time to be allowed for baking various kinds of cake, as so much depends on the heat of the oven. It should be narrowly watched while in the oven, and if it browns too fast, it should be covered with a thick paper. To ascertain when rich cake is sufficiently baked, stick a clean broom splinter through the thickest part of the loaf. If none of the cake adheres to the splinter, it is sufficiently baked. When cake that is baked on flat tins moves easily on them, it is sufficiently baked. 169. Frosting for cake. Allow for the white of 1 egg 9 heaping teaspoonsful of double refined sugar and 1 of nice Poland starch. The sugar and starch should be pounded and sifted through a very fine sieve. Beat the whites of eggs to a stiff froth so that you can turn the plate upside down without the eggs falling from it, then stir in the sugar gradually with a wooden spoon. Stir it 10 or 15 minutes without any cessation, then add a teaspoonful of lemon juice. Vinegar will answer, but is not as nice. Put in sufficient rose water to flavor it. If you wish to color it pink, stir in a few grains of cochineal powder, or rose pink. If you wish to have it of a blue tinge, add a little of what is called the powder blue. Lay the frosting on the cake with a knife soon after it is taken from the oven. Smooth it over, and let it remain in a cool place till hard. To frost a common-sized loaf of cake, allow the white of 1 egg and half of another. 170. Sponge gingerbread. Melt a piece of butter of the size of a hen's egg. Mix it with a pint of nice molasses, a tablespoonful of ginger, and a quart of flour. Dissolve a heaping tablespoonful of saleratus in half a pint of milk, strain and mix it with the rest of the ingredients, add sufficient flour to enable you to roll it out easily, roll it out about half an inch thick, and bake it on flat tins in a quick oven. Gingerbread made in this manner will be light and spongy if baked quick and made of nice molasses, but it will not keep good so long as hard gingerbread. 171. Hard molasses gingerbread. To a pint of molasses, put half a teacup of melted butter, a tablespoonful of ginger, and a quart of flour. Dissolve a teaspoonful of saleratus in half a pint of water, and stir it in, together with flour sufficient to enable you to roll it out. Bake it in a moderately warm oven. 172. Soft molasses gingerbread. Melt a teacup of butter, mix it with a pint of molasses, a tablespoonful of ginger, a pint of flour, and a couple of beaten eggs. Fresh lemon peel, cut into small strips, improves it. Dissolve a couple of teaspoonsful of saleratus in half a pint of milk, and stir it into the cake. Add flour to render it of the consistency of unbaked pound cake. Bake it in deep pans about half an hour. 173. Sugar gingerbread. Mix a pound of sugar with 6 ounces of butter. Beat 4 eggs and stir them into the butter and sugar, together with 3 teaspoonsful of ginger. Stir in gradually a pound and a half of flour. Dissolve a teaspoonful of saleratus in a wine glass of milk and stir it in, and bake the gingerbread immediately. 174. Ginger Snaps. Melt a quarter of a pound of butter, the same quantity of lard. Mix them with a quarter of a pound of brown sugar, a pint of molasses, a couple of tablespoonsful of ginger, and a quart of flour. Dissolve a couple of teaspoonsful of saleratus in a wine glass of milk and strain it into the cake. Add sufficient flour to enable you to roll it out very thin, cut it into small cakes, and bake them in a slow oven. 175. Spice Cakes. Melt a teacup of butter, mix it with a teacup of sugar and half a teacup of molasses. Stir in a teaspoonful of cinnamon, the same quantity of ginger, a grated nutmeg, and a teaspoonful each of caraway and coriander seed. Put in a teaspoonful of saleratus dissolved in half a teacup of water. Stir in flour till stiff enough to roll out thin, cut it into cakes, and bake them in a slow oven. 176. Cider Cake. Stir together a teacup of butter, 3 of sugar. Beat 4 eggs and put into the cake, together with 2 teacups of flour and a grated nutmeg. Dissolve a teaspoonful of saleratus in half a teacup of milk, strain it and mix it with the above ingredients. Stir in a teacup of cider and 4 more cups of flour. 177. Bannock or Indian Meal Cakes. Stir to a cream a pound and a quarter of brown sugar, a pound of butter. Beat 6 eggs and mix them with the sugar and butter. Add a teaspoonful of cinnamon or ginger. Stir in a pound and 3/4 of white Indian meal and a quarter of a pound of wheat flour. The meal should be sifted. Bake it in small cups and let it remain in them till cold. 178. Rich Cookies. Rub together, till white, a teacup of butter, 2 of sugar. Then stir in a couple of beaten eggs, a little flour, grate in a nutmeg. Dissolve a teaspoonful of saleratus in a teacup of milk or water, strain it onto the cake, then add flour till stiff enough to roll out easily. If you cannot roll out the cake without it sticking to the board and rolling pin, which should be previously floured, work in more flour, stamp and cut it into cakes. Bake them in a moderately warm oven. 179. Plain Tea Cakes. Mix thoroughly a teacup and a half of sugar, half a teacup of butter, stir in a little flour, and half a nutmeg. Dissolve a teaspoonful of saleratus in a teacup of milk, strain and mix it with the cake. Add flour till stiff enough to roll out. Roll it out half an inch thick, cut it into cakes, bake them on flat buttered tins in a quick oven. If baked slow, they will not be good. 180. New Year's Cookies. Weigh out a pound of sugar, 3/4 of a pound of butter. Stir them to a cream, then add 3 beaten eggs, a grated nutmeg, 2 tablespoonsful of caraway seed, and a pint of flour. Dissolve a teaspoonful of saleratus in a teacup of milk, strain and mix it with half a teacup of cider, and stir it into the cookies. Then add flour to make them sufficiently stiff to roll out. Bake them as soon as cut into cakes in a quick oven till a light brown. 181. Shrewsbury Cake. Stir together 3/4 of a pound of sugar, half a pound of butter. When white, add 5 beaten eggs, a teaspoonful of rose water or a nutmeg, and a pound of flour. Drop it with a large spoon onto flat tins that have been buttered. Sift sugar over them. 182. Tunbridge Cake. 6 ounces of butter, the same quantity of sugar, 3/4 of a pound of flour, a couple of eggs, and a teaspoonful of rose water. Stir to a cream the butter and sugar, then add the eggs, flour, and spice. Roll it out thin and cut it into small cakes. 183. Jumbles. Stir together till of a light color a pound of sugar and half the weight of butter. Then add 8 eggs beaten to a froth, essence of lemon or rose water to the taste, and flour to make them sufficiently stiff to roll out. Roll them out in powdered sugar about half an inch thick. Cut it into strips about half an inch wide and 4 inches long. Join the ends together so as to form rings. Lay them on flat tins that have been buttered. Bake them in a quick oven. 184. Composition Cake. 5 teacups of flour, 3 of sugar, 2 of butter, 5 eggs, a teaspoonful of saleratus, a teacup of milk, a wine glass of wine or brandy, 1 nutmeg, a pound of raisins. Stir the sugar and butter to a cream, then add the eggs beaten to a froth, and part of the flour and the spice. Dissolve the saleratus in the milk, strain and mix it with the brandy, stir it into the cake with the rest of the flour. Add the raisins just before the cake is put into the pans. 185. Rusk. Melt half a pound of butter and mix it with 2/3 of a pint of milk. Flour to make a thick batter. Add 3 tablespoonsful of yeast and set the batter in a warm place to rise. When light, beat 2 eggs with half a pound of rolled sugar. Work it into the batter with the hand, add a teaspoonful of salt, a teaspoonful of cinnamon, and flour to make them sufficiently stiff to mold up. Mold them up into cakes of the size you would make biscuit, lay them on flat tins previously buttered, let them remain till of a spongy lightness before baking. They will bake in a quick oven in the course of 15 minutes. 186. Wigs. Mix half a pound of sugar with 6 ounces of butter, a couple of beaten eggs, a teaspoonful of cinnamon. Stir in 2 pounds of flour, a teacup of yeast, and milk sufficient to make a thick batter. When light, bake them in small cups. 187. Nut cakes. Heat a pint of milk just lukewarm. Stir it into a teacup of lard. The lard should be melted. Stir in flour till it is a thick batter, then add a small teacup of yeast. Set it in a warm place. When light, work in 2 teacups and a half of rolled sugar, 4 eggs beaten to a froth, 2 teaspoonsful of cinnamon, and 1 of salt. Knead in flour to make it sufficiently stiff to roll out. Keep it in a warm place till risen again. When it appears of a spongy lightness, roll it out about half an inch thick, cut it into cakes with a wine glass, let them remain 15 or 20 minutes before boiling them. Boil them in a pot with about a couple of pounds of lard. The fat should be hot enough to boil up as they are put in, and a brisk fire kept under the pot. It should be shaken constantly while they are boiling. Only a few should be boiled at once. If crowded, they will not fry well. If you wish to have them look nice, dip them into powdered white sugar as soon as fried. The same lard, with a little more added, will answer to fry several batches of cakes in, if not burnt. 188. Crullers. Dissolve a teaspoonful of saleratus in 4 tablespoonsful of milk, or leave out 1 spoonful of milk and substitute 1 of wine. Strain it onto half a pint of flour, 4 tablespoonsful of melted butter, or lard, and a teaspoonful of salt. Beat 4 eggs with 6 heaping tablespoonsful of rolled sugar. Work them into the rest of the ingredients, together with a grated nutmeg. Add flour to make them stiff enough to roll out easily. They should be rolled out about half an inch thick, cut with a jagging iron or knife into strips about half an inch wide, and twisted so as to form small cakes. Heat a pound of lard in a deep pot or kettle. Some cooks use a frying pan to fry crullers in, but they are more apt to burn when fried in a pan. The fat should boil up as the cakes are laid in, and they should be constantly watched while frying. When brown on the underside, turn them. When brown on both sides, they are sufficiently cooked. 189. Molasses dough cake. Melt half a teacup of butter, mix it with a teacup of molasses, the juice and chopped rind of a fresh lemon, a teaspoonful of cinnamon. Work the whole with the hand into 3 teacups of raised dough, together with a couple of beaten eggs. Work it with the hand for 10 or 12 minutes, then put it into buttered pans. Let it remain 10 or 15 minutes before baking it. 190. Sugar dough cake. Dissolve a teaspoonful of saleratus in a wine glass of wine or milk, strain it onto 3 teacups of raised dough. Work into the dough a teacup of lukewarm melted butter, 2 teacups of rolled sugar, 3 eggs well beaten, and a couple of teaspoonsful of cinnamon. Work the whole well together for a quarter of an hour, then put it into cake pans. Let it stand in a warm place 15 or 20 minutes before baking it. 191. Measure cake. Stir to a cream a teacup of butter, 2 of sugar, then stir in 4 eggs beaten to a froth, a grated nutmeg, and a pint of flour. Stir it until just before it is baked. It is good either baked in cups or pans. 192. French cake. 1 pound of sugar, 3/4 of a pound of butter, a pound and a half of flour, 12 eggs, a gill each of wine, brandy, and of milk. Mix the sugar and butter together. When white, add the eggs beaten to a froth. The whites and yolks should be separated. Then stir in the flour, the milk and wine, and 1/4 of a grated nutmeg. Just before it is baked, add 3/4 of a pound of seeded raisins, a 1/4 of a pound of citron, and a 1/4 of a pound of almonds, blanched and pounded fine. To blanch almonds, see directions in number 168. 193. Washington cake. Stir together till quite white a pound of sugar, 3/4 of a pound of butter, then add 4 beaten eggs. Stir in gradually a pound and a half of flour. Dissolve a teaspoonful of saleratus in a teacup of milk, strain and mix it with a glass of wine, then stir it into the cake, together with a teaspoonful of rosewater and half a nutmeg. Just before it is baked, add a pound of seeded raisins. 194. Cup Cake. Mix 3 teacups of sugar with 1 1/2 of butter. When white, beat 3 eggs and stir them into the butter and sugar, together with 3 teacups of sifted flour and rosewater or essence of lemon to the taste. Dissolve a teaspoonful of saleratus in a teacup of milk, strain it into the cake, then add 3 more teacups of sifted flour. Bake the cake immediately, either in cups or pans. End of chapter 11. Recording by Nick Number.